Hello there YouTubers, subscribers and friends. On this scenario Saturday I will tackle a topic which is very popular among alternate history fans, and I will talk about what if the South had won the war. Basically I'm talking about what if the Confederate States of America won, in exclamation marks, against the USA. Or the Civil War. Now, there are many titles we can use for this topic. It is a topic where some people refer to, as I said before, the South, or some people would refer to it as CSA, or they would say, what if the US would be split into? Anyways, for having a South or an independent CSA, we would need several factors. Because let's face it, a CSA on its own would perform very, very poorly. For several reasons. The first one would be because most of the economic power was in the North, where we didn't have slavery, or at least officially there was no slavery. And as a consequence, there was a growth in all these industries, which later on also led to the result that the north part of the US became more innovative. Now, having an independent CSA would require, first of all, that the US would perform very, very poorly. I mean, they would have to be really incompetent. And also, let's say that the plans of General Lee from the South, they would actually have a success, and he would not be captured for the Maryland campaign in 1862, which would lead to an overwhelming victory at the Battle of Antietam. And another reason where the CSA would be not sustainable, or at least not really be, how should I say, in the point of winning a war, would be the ones of having foreign interference. I mean, the CSA would be more likely to accept British or French aid than the US, because the US was very, how should I say, actually isolationist, and they saw the Americas as their sphere of interest, where the Europeans should not meddle in. Whereas the CSA, if it would come heart to heart, they would accept some aid of, let's say, the French, who actually went in our real timeline to Mexico to establish their own emperor or puppet regime, let's say. So, but then again, for some reason, I wouldn't really see the French supporting the CSA, because at first they supported actually the US during their war against the British Empire. So the one who would actually be most likely to support the CSA could actually be the British Empire, but they themselves could probably have problems like wars or their own colonies, or they would have supplies problems where they would not really like to meddle in the American affairs. But then again, they could actually agree to do so, leading that some north parts of the US would be lost, and they could be incorporated in a bigger Canada. But that's all very, very, very much speculation. So let's say the UK and maybe also the French, and perhaps to a tiny percentage the Spanish, would accept to help the CSA for, let's say, growth of influence, little territories, and of course a lot of money. Now, talking about the CSA winning this civil war would be totally and plainly wrong. I could accept that the CSA would be able to have, let's say, a how you call this? They could have a stalemate, but never would they be able to overwhelm the US. So what we could have is that the CSA would somehow paralyze the US for several years, and they could even have some sort of growth, but they would have at a certain point to be able to abolish slavery, because without slavery they would be able to switch to industries which would later on also be helpful to have a better economy and also innovative ideas, and as a result have more performant weapons and armory. Then again, the US would be able to recover, except if the British would interfere in a bigger scale and take some territories, which would leave the US much more paralyzed, and the CSA could actually meddle in the affairs of the US and, let's say, support some candidates on their behalf who would at first be supportive of slavery, and then later on candidates who actually would be supportive of ideas which would be closer to the one of the CSA. Now, having an independent CSA and the US, of course, would also have other consequences. How would the CSA behave towards Mexico? Many people predict in the alternate histories that the CSA would just conquer some parts of Mexico here, some parts of Cuba. I think that this wouldn't be really the case. I could see them maybe taking some parts of the ex-Spanish Empire, let's say Cuba, or maybe even the Dominican Republic. But never on earth I would believe they would be able to take some parts of Mexico, because simply, even if Mexico would be in a state of disaster and chaos, the CSA wouldn't actually be more stable, and having a war would actually allow the US to intervene, and the CSA would have a very short-lived time. So the CSA would have to be very careful about going into a war, because the US would actually wait for such an opportunity to backstab them, which would lead to a result that both countries would, in the first years, be bitter enemies, almost less, let's say, North and South Korea. But at the end, I think the relations and the tensions, they would ease, and especially in a situation where we would have a First World War where Germany wins, they would have to be more cooperative. Otherwise, one of them might risk to either have a bigger German influence on them, or they would have, let's say, maybe even the British influence, because Canada is still a British part. Now, they could actually still try to maybe have an alliance to have some sort of counterweight, but then again, I wouldn't really believe that it's feasible, simply because in the first years they would have, let's say, like propaganda against each other, and their minds, or at least the minds of the governments, they would be strongly focused against each other, not allowing to have some sort of alliance. Maybe, let's say, after some big wars as the First World War and even the Second World War, which would be totally different, and in there I would refer to the one of the Central Powers wins. I will put the link in the description. They would have a very, very, very difficult time to accommodate each other. Now, some people say, yeah, after some time, maybe the South and the North, they would reunite. I beg to differ. I would say they could at the end even maybe have a relation like the US and Canada now and become allies, but it would take them a bigger while to do so. And also on an international stage, they would probably lose a lot of reputation and a lot of power, I mean the US as such, giving place to other countries or giving, let's say, more reputation to countries that still exist or still could be an empire, like, let's say, Great Britain or maybe France. And even Germany could do much better in such a scenario, economically at least. Now, there are many, many possibilities what could have happened, and we could also go down the road saying that where the CSA would win or have a stalemate against the US, Mexico might somehow stabilize and then attack them and just reclaim all which was the Mexican Empire. Or we might go down the road and say that the British Empire would launch a full-scale invasion from Canada, and maybe another possibility would be that the South would face their own civil war, where, for instance, Texas would have their own interests, and then you would have, I don't know, Georgia or other parts, which would result in very, very interesting scenarios. But as such, I think a CSA would result in a very different timeline, and I'm almost sure that it could lead to a timeline where Germany could win World War I. That's it. I hope you enjoyed it, and of course I missed many topics which I could talk about. I'm Althistory Luxembourg, and I hope I can see you on my next videos. Have a nice day. Bye. Don't forget to subscribe, give a comment, give a like, and watch all the other videos that I have on my channel. Have a great day.